Welcome to another episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. I'm Tom Schwab. I've been called the father of podcast interview marketing. And today, Kristen Nolan, one of our senior client account managers, is diving deep into the art of podcast guesting with someone who truly knows the ins and outs of making a great impression. If you've ever wondered how to prepare for a podcast interview, how to ensure you're aligned with the host, or simply how to sound your best, then this episode is for you. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Claudia Maye. Claudia is a seasoned expert in podcast guest preparations. She's worked with Interview Valet as a senior podcast relationship manager for going on 4 years now. She's helped hundreds of clients find their perfect podcast match and has invaluable insights into what makes a guest truly stand out. From crafting the perfect one sheet to understanding the technical side of things, Claudia's expertise covers it all. Whether you're a first-time guest or looking to refine your skills, today's conversation, it will provide you with actionable tips to enhance your podcast guesting experience and ensure you leave a lasting impression on the host and the audience. Let's get started.
Thank you, Tom. I am super excited to introduce my guest for the day. I have Claudia Maye, and I'm going to give her a second to introduce herself and tell you all about her background and expertise.
Thank you, Kristen. Yes, as Kristen said, my name is Claudia. I've been working with Interview Valet for about 3 years now. I work with podcast hosts to connect our wonderful guests to their correct and ideal podcast to get to their good audience. And I also work on the onboarding side where I get to meet our new clients as they come into us and get to know them, work with their one sheets, and talk about their goals and who they want to speak to. My background before podcasting, I have been a teacher, I have been a librarian. So being able to share knowledge and information and connect with people is very important to me.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So you work a lot with our podcast hosts. From your own experiences and feedback from hosts, what do you think the biggest things are that clients can do to prepare to be a good podcast guest?
Something that's really important is to listen to some of the episode so you know what the host's voice sounds like. How do you pronounce their name? Is it a rotating host list? Like, are there numerous people that you might be talking to, or knowing kind of their flow of the show? Do they start out with some like rapid fire fun questions to break the ice? Or do you dive directly in? Knowing the feel and kind of the vibe that the host gives off is super important because everyone's going to have their own personality, their own unique way of presenting themselves. So having listened to a few episodes, checking out their website is super important so you know how to come in prepared so that you're not thrown off from the get-go because you expected one thing and hear another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, knowing the host, knowing their audience and things like that are super important to set up the interview, in the right way and make sure that you're providing value to both the listener and the host. So those are great suggestions. I often refer to you as my one sheet guru. How important do you think a one sheet is when working to get booked on a podcast?
One sheets are so important. We've always been told how important a resume is or a CV is. We put a lot of time into those. You should put just as much time into your one sheet. And just like a resume and a CV that is a living document that's updated, make sure that you're re-looking at your one sheet to make sure that it is still relatable to what you are doing. Like, what are you doing within your company? Has something changed? Have you updated any branding with a logo or a social media handle, keeping them updated? Also, hosts are looking at these quickly, just as an employer would be looking at them quickly. Make sure that your headshot looks good. Make sure that your key focus, that why are you doing this? Why are you here? Is really what you want to say. Your interview topics are eye-catching. Then go to your bio. No one needs to know every single thing about you, just like a resume. You're not going to write every single task you've ever done for a job, but you do want to give your highlight reel. What have you done? What have you learned? So one sheets are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I advise my clients to make sure that they sound like you, right? Like we don't want it to sound like ChatGPT. We don't want it to sound like, Claudia. We want it to sound like the client. And so, there really is that emphasis there. And another thing that I really try to focus on with my clients and advise them on is the suggested interview topics. Those will typically be, I feel like, what a host will go and look at and go, okay, I can see this person and I having a conversation about XYZ and the value that it will bring to their listeners. So I think those are super important too, because it sort of helps, show the host what value you bring to both them and their listeners. So I definitely agree with the importance of the one sheet. We talk a lot about preparation. Can you walk us through like the key steps in preparing for a podcast interview? How can a client prepare? And I know we briefly talked about, listening to an episode and things like that, but can you dive a little deeper into what that means?
Yeah. Also making sure that your setup is good. Like when you get on a podcast interview, make sure that you have the least amount of distractions, because if you're recording at home, your house has noises that you're used to, but that doesn't necessarily mean the host is going to be used to it. If you have other people in the house, make sure they know what is going on. If you're in your business, make sure that people know not to knock on your door if you're normally an open door policy person. Double check that your mic is plugged in, that whatever other equipment you have is working, that your speakers are turned on, because I can't tell you, even going into a Zoom meeting, I'm like, I can't hear the person. And I realize it's because my speakers were muted. Double checking the kind of basic things that we're used to. And you already have enough nerves going into recording a podcast. Make sure that the basics are covered.
I think that's really great advice. It's so funny when you and I got on here today, I could hear you very little and I realized my volume was down. So I've also, with my microphone, I've recorded a loom, right, for a client and realized my microphone isn't on. And it's simple things that we're like so busy, thinking about our content and, our nerves, like you said, that it can be difficult to sort of, not take into account those simple things, right? We're focused on the higher level things as well. So, okay. So one thing with that is we're all human and we make mistakes, but are there common mistakes or even misconceptions that people make before their first podcast interview, and how can they avoid them?
I think being sometimes maybe a little too sure of yourself and not thinking about the fact that not everyone knows your lingo, the things that you say. If you're used to only talking to people within your company and you have different words or phrases that you use that are just for you, that doesn't mean the podcast host knows what you're talking about or their audience is going to know. Writing down something on note cards or paper, because you might forget to mention some of the really key things that you went on to talk about because you got so invested in the conversation you were having with the host that you forgot to mention something that was vital, the reason you're there. Like, did you forget to promote the book you just wrote? Did you forget to mention the website that you want them to go to or how to connect with you? There are so many different things that you might make little mistakes the first few times going on because you're not used to the flow. Or even sometimes you're so used to talking to people that, again, you forget to mention things or you say things in a way that only you might understand and not everyone else.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I've had a couple of clients tell me that they'll do like Post-it notes around their computer screen. No one can see those Post-it notes. So if there are things like, if you have a welcome page, right, that changes usually with each podcast. So writing that down and making sure that you're able to, know what that is, right? There's nothing worse than a host asking, how can our listeners find you? And you're scrambling to figure out what your welcome page is, and you're flustered. So really just being proactive, and having all the information in front of you so that, if for some reason your mind blanks out, you have that to reference. So those are all great tips. So I love talking about the nerdy technical side of podcasting. But what role does technical preparation play in ensuring a smooth interview? And then what kind of tools or setups would you recommend for those who are new to podcasting?
When you're doing a podcast interview, making sure that you have a good headset is important. High quality microphone. When you're in a room, make sure that you've maybe even done a Zoom call with someone to see if there's not a lot of echo. Because if you were in a room that's pretty sparse or a lot of like hard objects, your voice may bounce off and be echoey. That's not how you want yourself to sound when you are on an interview. So again, people aren't going to see on the other side of your camera. They're just seeing you. So if you need to add a blanket or a pillow or something to help muffle the sound in a room that's otherwise pretty echoey and you prefer to have a room that way because it's just you in there, then add some stuff, make it work well. You have people that you can get on a Zoom call with, a Google Meet with. See what they say. Talk to a friend who's going to give you the good, the bad, the ugly about how you sound. Talk to your client account manager. Talk to these people and say, hey, how do I sound? Is the lighting good? Thinking about the fact that in the morning, the light in your room is going to be different than the afternoon. How are you going to make that work? So you might not have that harsh afternoon sun on you during an afternoon interview. Also, again, make sure that everything's plugged in. It happens. Make sure your laptop's plugged in or your computer, that anything going on, it happens. And then you're like, I don't understand what's going on. And when nerves are already high at the beginning of an interview, you don't want to be scrambling to plug something in. Try to do it before the interview and don't jump in 10 minutes prior and try to get everything set up. Give yourself plenty of time to get situated.
Yeah. And I know here at Interview Valet, with all of our new clients, we send them microphones, right? We want to make sure that they sound, great and they look great. And then we do a walkthrough interview. And that's really not to like discuss their content necessarily, but it's really to make sure that when they're ready to begin guesting, that they sound great, they look great, they know all of those things so that they're ready to just kind of dive right in and get to talking to hosts. So I think those are very important because the worst thing that you can have is to record a podcast and have poor audio quality or, different things like that. And then the host says, I really can't publish this, and you both have wasted time. So that's really unfortunate in those instances as well. And it is rare, but it does happen, right? I also advise my clients, I don't take interviews on the road, right? Like some people travel, the internet connection can be very, unpredictable. And so it's really important that you also have that. So that plays into the quality of the episode as well. So, we've talked about this a little bit as well, but like synergy with the host, right? We want to have, a relationship with the host. And I think that can really make or break an interview. So what steps can a potential guest do to ensure that they're aligned with the host's expectations and the overall tone of the show?
Making sure that, again, listening to at least an episode. I know that our time is valuable, so you might not have a chance to listen to a few episodes. Listen to the beginning of the episode, maybe forward to about the middle to see how things are still feeling in the middle of the interview. Go to the end, see how they close it out, because every host has a different way of closing out their show. There might be something, again, at the end, some little questions at the end, making sure that you know the flow. Connect with your host on LinkedIn, their social media. Take a look at and see how they interact on post, because if they have a sense of humor, that's going to come through in the way that they post. If they are interacting in a way and you're like, oh yeah, okay, they made this joke or they went to this school. I know this area. You have something to connect with. And the host has that connection with their audience because it's their show. So if you're able to then connect with the host, you are connecting with the audience. If you're looking at their website, look and see the other people that might be going to this website. Look at the other guests that have been on. What has their message been? Are they aligning with what you're doing? If you are vastly different from the other guest, maybe find out why. Talk to the host and go, hey, I see that you've talked to people who do a lot of different things from me. What's going on? It might be because you were so interesting to this host. So they're like, oh, we really want someone different. We want to showcase your differences. Differences are a good thing. Like, you don't want to be exactly like everyone else, but knowing their sense of humor, knowing the way they speak to their connections on LinkedIn or Instagram is important.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned, connecting with them and seeing their social media, because I think that will also help sort of play in on what happens after the interview, right? You can see where they're going to promote. So you're prepared for that. You can go ahead and be very proactive. I'm personally a very proactive person, but I think, going and researching the host and researching their social media, how do they post these episodes? I have a client right now, and she sort of, she posts LinkedIn and she says, I'm looking forward to my interview with this particular podcast host. And I think that's great because it's sort of a teaser to say, hey, I'm going to go talk to this host. And then it also shows the host that she's excited to talk to them. And so I think once a host sees that, it's sort of like a mutually beneficial thing where they want to promote her and they want to promote her business and her episode. So it just sort of lays that foundation at the very beginning to ensure that as they move forward, the host definitely sees the value in having her as a guest and what value she brings as well. So I think that's awesome. So I know I talked a little bit about my previous client. I also had another previous client. And one of the things, so he had his own show and he had also been a guest quite a few times, but he had mentioned that he was thrown a curveball question. And he loved it because he was like, it keeps me on my toes. But what advice do you have for a first time guest to prepare for potential curveball questions or maybe an unexpected topic during the initial interview?
There is no harm in pausing after a question to get your thoughts together. You can do a lead into it with going, oh, that's such a great question, while saying that you were able to maybe calm your own nerves. Because if that curveball really threw you and maybe got you feeling something, because if you feel maybe a slight attack with the curveball because it came out of nowhere, because we get defensive as humans, knowing that the hosts are not there to attack you, neither is their audience. Like, they're there to get more information. Just because it's a curveball doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Pause, think about it, rephrase the question in your answer so that as your answer comes out, you are answering what you heard from the question. Because every now and again, someone will ask a question and we hear what we want or we think we hear when it's not the full question that was asked. So when you answer the question, answer it as a sentence with that question within your answer so that everyone can know that this is what you're answering about it. Pausing, taking some time, and also maybe ask a question back to clarify if you were confused or slightly concerned about the question. There's no harm in that. Make sure, because again, this is just as much your content that you're putting out there as it is the host. And you want to make sure that you feel good in the moment and that you are presenting yourself at your best.
Absolutely. And I know one thing that you had mentioned before is that, a lot of times the interviews are not live, right? So if there is a point in the conversation and you need to take a minute, I think it's perfectly okay to say to the host, hey, can we just take one quick second And then, they're able to edit that part out where it would then buy you time. Now, I'm not saying to do that 10 times in an interview, but if you're in a situation where you don't feel equipped to answer the question, I think that it's okay to say, hey, let's pause for a second. Let me make sure I fully understand this question so I can, provide, the best answer. So, making yourself memorable or stand out amongst other guests is super important. What strategies can first-time guests use to make a lasting impression on both the host and the audience?
Main thing is being authentic to yourself. So if you're someone that's a little more calm and reserved, don't go on a podcast and be a hype man, because that's not going to be you. Being memorable and standing out does not mean that you have to go outside of your own comfort zone to stand out. Being the guest that shows up fully on time, ready to go, very professional in the way that you're handling yourself. That doesn't mean professional can't have fun or make jokes or be silly, but showing up on time with your equipment ready to go, knowing how to use the hosting server for the podcast interviews is very important. You're going to stand out to the host if you show up and you know what you're doing. That's already really big. The technical side of podcasting is sometimes it feels like a mountain that you have to climb just to get started. So showing up with that's important. For the audience, knowing more about the show, because that means that you have a connection. If you could even relate to a previous episode you listened to, or if you're able to talk about their website or what the host does, the audience is going to go, oh, cool. They care about the host too. They care about us as the audience because we've been listening to all of these episodes. We have an emotional connection or a thought about what's happened before. If you're just coming on and you're just wanting to take your hour, say your stuff and leave, that's also going to show.
Yeah, that used car salesman approach never works too well, both in podcasting and otherwise. One other thing that I was thinking about is in terms of making yourself memorable, right? I had a previous client and he was a business coach. And so a lot of the podcasts that he went on were business focused. And so what he would do as the guest is after each interview, he would select a book, not his own, but a book that he felt would be most relatable to the host. Maybe they had a conversation about something specific and a book just sort of popped in and said, this would be a great a great book for this particular host, and he would send it. Now, obviously, not everyone is equipped to do that. But I feel like that was something that was a way to just, connect with the host, and really show value in him as a guest. And I think, not all guests are doing that. Not all guests are sending thank you cards or taking that next step. So I think that sort of made him stand out a little bit more than maybe some other guests. Cause I think we also have to understand that hosts get a ton of people reaching out to them, right? I mean, maybe not in the beginning, but once you sort of get going, people are going to start reaching out to the hosts. And so what is it that you're doing to make yourself stand out? And I know we touched upon that with the one sheet, but really just making it about, a relationship and a connection. And I know some of my most successful clients look at podcast guesting as an additional networking tool. So do you have any advice on how guests can leverage their first podcast appearance to build long-term relationships with hosts and sort of expand their network?
Again, looking at social media and looking at their LinkedIn, the fact that after you talk to someone for an hour and you already have that social media connection, interact on their post, interact with what they're doing, and not just a like or reshare, but write a comment, ask a question, because questions are going to get other people to comment or the original poster to write something back. Looking at any of their other posts and then looking within that, because if they're starting to always interact with someone else and you're like, oh, this person does a lot of the same stuff I do, or this is someone that I've been looking to find with my own business. I've been looking at branching out and doing different marketing and this person is interacting. Oh, let me ask, hey, I see you're connected with them. What do you think of their services? What do you think of what they do? Making it looking at the whole picture of someone and not just their profile or what they post, but things they interact with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, going beyond just a simple transaction of like a host and guest and really diving in and connecting with them on a deeper level can only bring about additional opportunities. Like I've had clients that have been asked to be speakers in larger, conferences. I've had clients who have been hired by the host or who have hired the host. And so it's really just an opportunity to like make that connection. And really take that the next step further. So I think there's definite value there. And I think there's a lot of information that we give, and especially like when I have new clients onboarding that may not have podcasted in the past, I think it can sometimes be overwhelming. So I hope that through this conversation that we've provided some ways to help anyone considering podcast guesting to feel confident to, go into their potential interviews and feel prepared and, reduce some of those nerves, right? Well, thank you so much, Claudia. It's been great chatting with you, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
What a fantastic discussion between Kristen and Claudia. Today, we explored everything from the importance of preparation to the nuance of building a connection with the podcast host. Claudia's insights on how to make yourself more memorable, whether through a well-crafted one-sheet, technical preparation, or simply by being authentic. They're all vital for anyone looking to succeed as a podcast guest. If there's one takeaway from today's episode, it's that preparation is key. Knowing your host, understanding their audience, and ensuring you're technically ready can all make the difference in how you come across during the interview. But beyond that, it's about being genuine and connecting with your host in a way that resonates not just with them, but with the audience too. So here's your next step. Take a look at your current approach to podcast guesting. Are you really as prepared as you could be? Are you showing up as your authentic self? Use the tips Claudia shared today to refine your strategy and elevate your podcast appearances. Now, if you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from knowing this. And as always, keep tuning in to learn more about how you could leverage podcast interviews to grow your brand and to grow your business. Exposure brings opportunity. Until next time, keep showing up, prepared, and ready to amaze.